Good afternoon. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about our fourth installment for Chapter 2. So far, we've talked about the economic system, provided some definitions. Second segment, we talked about the factors of production, got into more detail on those. And then in the third segment, we talked about the production possibilities curve, or the PPC. And so gave the theoretical background, how it works, the fact that it, for it to function as it should, whether it's for a individual shop owner or for an economy that is, nationwide economy, it has to, again, to function fully and to provide the information that those individuals or those aggregate economies need, is to makes the assumption that the factors of production are fully employed, and that's not just labor, it's also capital, it's natural resources, it's technology, it's entrepreneurship, and not only they're fully employed, but they have to be employed efficiently. And that tends to apply that either somebody or a group of somebodies will be setting up strategies, setting up the production process, and determining how those factors of production, scarce resources, are going to be allocated and spread across the production function in order to ensure efficient production. So as we kind of move forward and we try to answer the basic economic question of what, how, for whom, and reserves for the future, we're going to get into more detail on the PPC, and specifically when we talk about comparative advantage. Comparative advantage, especially from an international trade perspective, basically means the market system for most of our modern economies is based on the theory of exchange. You have market economies scattered globally across the world, and each market economy is producing goods and services not only for internal consumption, but for export or for exchange or for trade, whatever terminology you want to use, with other trade partners around the globe. So now we're starting to look at, exports, imports, how they offset each other, using comparative advantage to make both trade partners better off. So you're trying to increase or optimize the utility for both trade partners, and in optimizing that utility for both trade partners, you're also optimizing the welfare, the well-being of those individuals living in those countries that become trade partners. An economy's opportunity cost is lower than any other economy for producing a good or service. Then that makes it an economy with a competitive advantage. I think the example they used in the textbook was, producing pizza and beer. You can always do the agricultural products and technology, clothing, and other food staples. So there's a lot of opportunity for comparative advantage among different trade partners. At the edge that Adam Smith called absolute advantage is also his idea of pushing economies toward comparative advantage. Trade allows economies to consume outside of their PPC. Remember when we talked about the PPC is a bowed concave frontier that combines the X and Y axis and different probabilities or possibilities, or at least potential possibilities of producing two different products. If the point of production falls inside that concave or bowed sphere, then we're producing inefficiently. If it falls outside of that concave or bowed sphere, then it's usually considered unattainable unless through some way that we can expand growth to get out there, or that we can trade with another trade partner. And why is this unattainable? It's unattainable because of, if you go back to the PPC, the assumptions are two products, factors of production are fixed. So you're not able to adjust those factors of production, at least in the short run, in the theory of the PPC. And then we've, farther talk about the economy is best producing a product is measured. It's measured by who can produce it the most cost effectively or with the least level of opportunity cost. So there we go back again to comparative advantage. Comparative advantage, talking about opportunity costs, scarce resources, and trade-offs. David Ricardo postulated that each economy or person should focus on comparative advantage and trade. And that comparative advantage and trade, if companies and their respective economies and countries are focusing on comparative advantage and trades, then that should, in theory, move both populations to a point that is outside of the PPC or outside what initially we call that in that unattainable sphere of the production process. And then if you take that concept and that thought and move it into international trade, countries specialize and then they trade with other companies. And as we said in the last segment, everybody specializes. You specialize, I specialize, the person sitting here too specializes. All companies within the United States try to specialize to the degree they can. Countries are specializing. Everybody's trying to get that comparative advantage. Restrictions on trade produce countries from using comparative advantage. And the issue with trade restrictions, what you find is it affects the prices of both the exports and the prices of the imports coming in. And it either drives the price up or the price down, depending on what the trade restrictions are. And the trade restrictions, again, it dampens comparative advantage and dampens the ability to trade with another country. Trade policy doesn't impact how a company fully utilizes factors of production, and that's true. The country is going to take and again, employ or face full employment of those factors of production and then try to use those factors of production to produce goods and services efficiently. If the United States takes and implements trade restrictions on China, then they hope they can turn around and find another trade partner to help balance those imports and exports. Same thing with trade restrictions from Russia or any other country. They will need, with trade restrictions, trade restrictions coming in with imports or going out with exports, it's going to impact price, it's going to impact the well-being of both countries, and at the same time, it's going to force those countries to try to find other trade partners that they can use to offset the import-export imbalance and to be able to utilize their comparative advantage in the production process. And lastly, most economists, I think, will agree that unrestricted trade allows countries to optimize comparative advantage. And by optimizing comparative advantage with unrestricted trade, it makes the consuming population of both countries that serve as trade partners. It helps drive growth, it helps drive income, it helps drive just individual well-being. And that's kind of the synopsis of trade, according to what we find in this textbook. One last thing on the application of PC, the PPC, is that I've had individuals ask me, do employers or do company owners or CEOs or company presidents actually use the PPC? I think they are implicitly using a PPC. What you find is companies have multiple products. PPC only compares two at a time. So I think implicitly they're using it. Have I used PPC in the past? I have, and I'll just take Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York as an example. I knew at any given time exactly what the production possibilities were for any one of my, quote, labor resources. And I knew that if I started shuffling the labor resources from one project to the other, I had to be extremely careful not to impact the production potential of either project. If I moved them from point A to point B to work on a project simply because I was running short of staff, then I had to be extremely careful of what that opportunity cost was for moving from point A to point B, or vice versa, from point B to point A. Those are kind of it. That's the kind of information that I knew on a daily basis. I had the charts and graphs that I could use. Most of mine was driven by monetary gain, and specifically recovering dollars from providers that resulted because claims were incorrectly paid, either issues with contracts, issues with the provider billing, claims adjudication system issues. For whatever reason, those claims did not adjudicate accurately or process accurately, if you like that as a better term. And I knew that our goal was to bring as many of those dollars back in. And to do that, I had to efficiently allocate those resources. And I used information I had readily at hand on a daily basis. So that's just my own perception and my own use of the PPC. I think a lot of CEOs, company presidents do the same thing because they are constantly in the data, constantly understanding what their teams and what their companies are doing at any given point in time. That kind of wraps up the segment 4. Got a couple of more segments I want to get to as we go through chapter 2, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.